Mental Fascination by William Walker Atkinson. The Fable of the Mentative Couple. Once upon a time there lived in the land of Mentalvania, in a wonderful building called the Mentative Castle, a man and a woman called the Mentative Couple. They were happy, though married. They lived in harmony because they were useful to one another, and neither was complete without the presence of the other, and neither did his or her best work unless the other was present and assisting. Well now, the man was called Volus, which is the same as the English name Will, and the woman was called Emocione, which in the language of that country meant something like the combination of emotion, desire, and imagination. Now the chronicles inform us that these two people had natures entirely different from each other, as has been said. We are told that Volus was of a stern, inflexible, strong, positive nature, apt to stick to a thing once begun, full of the will to live and vitality, full of determination and spirit, with a strong dash of the let me alone and get out of my way in his makeup, with a taste for meeting difficulties and overcoming obstacles, with a goodly degree of habit of reaching out and taking hold of what Emocione wanted and needed, and a powerful lot of self-respect and self-reliance in him. He was apt to be firm, although his firmness was not the stubbornness of the mule, and his general keynote was strength. He was a good warrior and defender of his castle. But Emocione was of an entirely different type, temperament, and character. She was most impressionable, imaginative, emotional, credulous, fanciful, full of desire, curious, sympathetic, and easily persuaded. While Volus was all willing and thinking, Emocione was all feeling. Volus was a strong character, but lacked certain qualities that make for success. But these qualities Emocione possessed, and she supplied the deficiency in Volus. Volus had to figure out everything, while Emocione had intuition, and jumped at a conclusion in a way remarkable to Volus, who couldn't understand the process at all. When he would ask Emocione for an explanation, she would say lightly, "Oh, just because," which answer would often provoke profane and irreverent discourse on the part of Volus. But nevertheless, he learned to respect these becauses of Emocione, and found that they helped him in his business. Emocione would dream out things and see things a long way ahead, and then Volus would proceed to put these plans into operation. Volus couldn't see very far ahead of his nose, while Emocione could see miles beyond and years ahead. And besides this faculty of mental imagery that came in so useful in Volus' business, Emocione also possessed a burning and ardent desire for things, which she managed to communicate to Volus, thereby causing him to get out and do things that otherwise he would never have dreamed of doing. Emocione was like fire, and Volus like water. The water would hold the fire in check, but at the same time the fire would heat up the water, and the result would be the steam of action. And so you see, these two, this mentative couple, formed a fine co-partnership and prospered mightily. But alas, the tempter entered Eden, and the attractive stranger meandered in the direction of the mentative castle, and when he reached there, trouble occurred. And this is what happened. One day Volus was absent from the castle, being engaged in some arduous enterprise, and consequently the castle was unguarded. Volus had provided against this by instructing Emocione that she was to keep the castle gate closed tight when he was away from home, and never to gaze without in his absence, for there was some mysterious danger lurking without when he was away. Emocione had faithfully followed the directions of her liege lord, although her womanly curiosity was piqued thereat. Many the time she had heard the strange knockings at the castle gate, but she heeded them not, and even refrained from looking out of the little peephole in the gate, though this last was much against her inclination, for she could see no harm in just looking. But to return to our tale, this particular day, when Volos was absent from home, her curiosity was too much for Emotione when she heard the strange knocking at the gate, and breaking her rule, she ventured to peep without. Looking down, she saw a most attractive stranger, with a fascinating smile on his lips. He looked almost as strong as Volos, but he seemed to have a dash of the woman in him. Besides, he had the strength, but also the charm that Emotione recognized as being part of her own nature. "Ah," sighed Emotione, "here is a man who can understand me." The fascinating stranger smiled sweetly, and looking her in the eyes, masterfully asked to be admitted. "No, no," replied Emotione, "I cannot let you in, for Volos told me not to." "Ah, fair lady," said the stranger softly, "Volos means all right, but he is rather old fogyish and behind the times. He does not understand as do you and I. Pray, let me in." And like Mother Eve, Emotione took the bait. Well, to make a long story short, when Volos came home, he found that Emotione had subscribed to a set of De Revue Moderne Art, a beautiful work issued by the Deluxe Brothers of Fifth Avenue, to be issued in 824 weekly parts, at the nominal price of $5 a part, 739 parts of which were already out and would be delivered shortly. She had also given a number of side orders for manifold wares, which had dazzled her untrained and unguarded fancy. Volos cried to the gods of his land, but it was too late. The contracts had been signed, but that was but the beginning. Volos did not understand just what was the matter, and contented himself with scolding Emotione, whereat she wept bitterly. But the poison went on with its deadly work, and when Volos again was absent from home, the habit reasserted itself, and when the fascinating stranger again called at the castle, he was admitted. And when Volos returned, he found the castle furnished from dungeon to watchtower with costly rugs and furniture and various other articles bought from Morgenstern's popular installment house, at $1,000 down and $100 per week. He also found that the castle had been lightning rodded from ground to turret on each wing, tower, and annex, and that notes containing a law-proof, judgment-confessed clause had been given in exchange therefor. And then Volos sware by the beard of Mars, the war god, that he would have no more of this. He would remain at home thereafter, and he did. But the subtle stranger was onto the game, in all of its details, and this is how he played it on Volos, even though the latter remained at home. A few days later, after Volos had determined to remain at home, there came a band of mountebanks, singing, dancing, and performing juggling tricks. Volos sat on the great stone beside the open castle gate, and his attention was attracted by the sounds and sights. Faster the dancers whirled, louder beat the drums, sweeter grew the singing, more bewildering grew the feats of jugglery, until poor Volos forgot all about the open castle gate, so rapt was he at the strange sights, sounds, dances, and feats of jugglery. Then one of the mountebank gang, who was really the attractive stranger disguised in motley array, slipped unseen past Volos, and in a moment was engaged in eager conversation with the impressionable Emotione. Volos watched the crowd until it moved away, and then entering the castle and closing the gate behind him, he was confronted by Emotione in tears, for she dreaded the coming storm. "Alack-a-day, woe's me," she cried. I am again in trouble, O Volus, my liege lord. I have just ordered from the fascinating stranger who slipped past you at the gate a baby grand, self-playing, automatic, liquid air valved radium carburetor harpsichord, upon which I may play for you all classes of music, ranging from Wagner's Götterdämmerung to the popular ragtime air entitled Kiss You, Babe, Goodbye. With feeling, depth of expression, and soulful understanding, according to the words of the fascinating stranger who took my order. Godzooks! Ejaculated Volus. Fain would I cry aloud the name of that production of Wagner's just mentioned by thee, and by my halidom, e'en shalt thou soon be singing to me the words of that ragtime melody just quoted by thy false red lips. Zounds! Of a truth, I have been stung again by that fascinating stranger. I must gaze no more upon these fleeting scenes of merriment and amazement, lest I be again decorated with the ass's ears. Aha! Volus is himself again, and the next time the fascinating stranger appears upon the scene, he shall be smitten hip and thigh with my trusty battle-axe, and my snickersee shall pierce his foul carcass. But alas, even once more was poor Volus deceived and trifled with. Once more was poor Emotione fascinated by the stranger, and it came about in this way. On the day of his last undoing, Volus sat on the open step in front of the narrowly opened castle door. No man shall pass me now, cried he. But fate willed otherwise, for as he sat there approached many people who took seat upon the steps before the gate, and engaged Volus in long-heated and wearisome discourses regarding the outlook for the crops, the presidential campaign, the Japanese question, race suicide, the new theology, how old was Anne, the problem of the final outcome of the collision between the irresistible force and the immovable body, the canals on Mars, what Roosevelt will do when his term expires, and many other weighty, interesting, and fascinating topics of general interest. Most agreeable were these visitors, and most considerate of Volus' feelings were they, and although they seemed to differ from him at the beginning of each argument, still they courteously allowed him to convince them inch by inch, until they finally acknowledged that he was invincible in argument and invulnerable in logic. "'Tis passing strange," quoth Volus, "but nevertheless 'tis true, that I always find myself on the right side of every question, and the wonder grows when they all admit it in the end. Verily, I am developing into a wise guy." And pondering thus, he fell sweetly asleep from the rigor of his disputes, the flattering attentions shown him, the joys of the victory, and the exceeding amount of attention and interest he had expended. For human nature has its limitations, even in the case of one so strong as Volus. And while he slumbered, the fascinating stranger, who was really the leader of the argumentative visiting committee, crept into the house and unloaded upon Emotione a choice collection of gilt-edged mining stock, pure gilt all the way through, in fact, a bunch of flying machine bonds, and 5,000 donkey power vestibuled drawing room observation car automobile called the Yellow Peril. And when Volus discovered what had happened, he wept aloud, crying bitterly, "Odds bones, 'sdeath of a cert am I, the Baron E.Z. Mark." And thereupon he sent for the wise man who dwelt in the next barony. The wise man came, and after hearing the story said, "My children, yours is a sad case, but matters may be adjusted without a visit to Sioux Falls, and without the raising of the question of alimony. The trouble is as follows. Volos, without emotione, has no desire or incentive to do things. He has no wants to satisfy, and therefore does nothing. He needs emotione to supply the desire, and without her he has no feeling. He is nothing but a hard-shell clam. Therefore, he needs her to supply the feeling. For verily and of a truth, feeling is the spice of life. And without her he has no imagination, and cannot see beyond the end of his nose. And what is life without imagination? Gadzooks, one might as well be a mummy. And on the other hand, emotione without Volos is a consuming fire of desire, an unrestrained imagination, an intuitive faculty degenerated into the basest superstition, most deplorable credulity, and the idlest fancy. Volos has no desire, emotion, or imagination of his own, and emotione has no will of her own. Verily, cannot it be seen by all that this couple needs one another the worst way? Each alone is but an incomplete half. United they stand, divided they fall. In union alone is their strength for them. And more than this, each without the other falls a prey to the wiles of some fascinating stranger. We have seen how emotione was fascinated and controlled by the will of the stranger who gained access to the castle. But I have also seen, by my magic art, that when Volos was away from home on important business, without having emotione along to keep him straight, he fell a victim to the wiles of the desire and imagination of a fair stranger across the river, and did her bidding, and used his will to perform her tasks, instead of those desired by his own emotione. Verily art these people quits with one another, and should now begin over again. True it is that harmony will be theirs only when they are together. And this is the secret of the undoing of emotione. Without the will of Volos to protect her, direct her, and advise her, emotione allowed her desire, imagination, and emotion to run wild and unrestrained. And so she became so impressionable as to allow herself to be mastered by the will of the stranger, who took advantage of the same, and gathered to himself many choice orders for things. And even when Volos sat by the door watching the players, dancers, and jugglers, his attention was so centered on what he saw that the fascinating stranger slipped through the gate. It was even as if Volos had been absent from home. And again, when Volos allowed himself to become engaged in weighty discourse with the visiting committee, and used up his energy and force in argument and dispute with them, and when he permitted himself to be jollied into a false security by these united brethren of the Blarney Stone, he relaxed his vigilance and allowed himself to become tired, drowsy, and sleeping, and so fell into a doze at his post. And the stranger again entered and took emotione's orders for goods. And this, then, is the remedy, as my successor, Lawson of Boston, will say in the centuries to follow. This is the remedy. Each person of this mentative couple must stick close to the other. Volos must have no important business across the river, which will allow emotione to be without a protector and advisor. And emotione must stick close to Volos and satisfy her curiosity, imagination, emotion, and desire by setting him to work out things for her, to do things dreamed of by her, to get her things she desires, to express the things felt by her. This is the secret of success, dear mentative couple. Mutual work by desire and will, working in unison and harmony, each faithful to the other, each guarding the other from the fascinating strangers that beset each when separated. Now then, children, get to work. And saying this, the wise man vanished from sight. And the moral of this fable of the mentative couple is this, that the mind of every man and woman is a mentative castle, wherein dwells a volus and an emotione. And what happened to the couple in the fable may happen and does happen to many in everyday life. The will straying from home and paying attention to other attractions leaves the castle unguarded, and the fascinating stranger enters. And again, the will has its attention distracted by passing objects of interest, and forgets the castle door. And again, the will allows itself to be fatigued, tired, and jollied by useless argument and talk and cogitation at the instigation of the designing, fascinating stranger, and the latter slips past the gate. And in each case, inside the gate is Emotione unprotected, an innocent, true to her own nature, credulous, imaginative, fanciful, desireful, and emotional. Is it any wonder that she orders goods that are not wanted by the family? And the remedy of the wise man, as given to the mentative couple, may be and should be applied to every man and woman in his or her mental castle. And this, then, is the moral of the fable. End of chapter 7.